Chair Stevenson, would you like to move your bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move House File 17 be recommended to be re-referred to the Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Committee.
Very good. Chair Stevenson moves that House File 17 be recommended to be re-referred to the Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Committee. Chair Stevenson, to your bill.
Don't I have the amendment? Yeah, I have the A1 amendment, Madam Chair, if I could offer that at this time.
Very good.
I'll move the A1-1, which is an author's amendment that gets the bill in the shape I'd like the committee to consider it.
Cool. Members, any questions about the A1-1 that the bill gets the bill in the shape the author would like?
Madam Chair.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Chair Stevenson, would you mind just quickly running through what the A1 amendment does?
Chair Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative New Brindley. It makes a number of technical changes. There are some substantive changes in as well. As I'm looking at the A1, you can see that starting on lines 1.5, it changes the composition of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board to one that consists of members appointed by the governor, removing the legislator members from the voting capacity. That's in response, as I recall, to some court cases about whether legislators should be voting board members on an administrative panel. There's some discussions about some of the thresholds that trigger that trigger some of the actions in the bill that have been the result of stakeholder conversations and looking at what's been effective in other states. There is discussion of some of the different factors that are being considered, again, kind of reflective of what we've seen in some other states. I should add that this is a bill, it's actually two bills that are now one bill, but both of the predicate bills have been around for several years and have passed the House as separate measures in previous years and have been considered and implemented in other states. So there's things that we have learned both from the legislative process in prior years in this state and by looking at the experience of other states that inform some of the decision-making that's been going on there. Beyond that, I don't know if you have specific questions about what you're seeing in here, but that's kind of a general overview.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Representative Stevenson, for running through that. And I had actually noted the makeup of the board as I was running through the bill. And just for clarification, so your understanding of your underlying language would say that the member appointed by the majority leader, the minority leader, the speaker, and the minority leader of the House, that those would actually be members of the legislature in the underlying, it's not clear. I would have assumed it was actually a community appointee appointed by those legislative leaders. So you have just removed those entirely as voting members.
Chair Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative New Brindley. Yeah, I think that I see the ambiguity in the language that you just in the old language that you just pointed out, and I think that the new language clarifies that we're not having members on because it's problematic to have voting members of the legislature on an administrative board like this.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Members, any further question to the A1-1 to get the bill in the shape the author would like? In that case, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say no. All right, Mr. Chair, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This bill relates to the high and soaringly increasing cost of prescription drugs across Minnesota and, in fact, the country. I know that a lot of members spent a lot of time in the last few months talking to their constituents in their districts at their doors or over the phone. And so I'm sure all of us, if we stop for even a second, can think about one conversation that we had with at least one member of our legislative district's community who is struggling with the cost of prescription drugs, which are just frankly out of control. It's one of the most common things that I recall hearing on the campaign trail, stories that tear at your heartstrings about parents doing whatever it takes to make sure that their kids have the drugs that they need to live, about older people choosing between their drugs and their mortgage, of splitting medication, of rationing medication. And at the same time, what we see consistently in the newspaper are stories of prices that are soaring and fueling out-of-control compensation for executives at large pharmaceutical companies when we think about things like the cost of the EpiPen going up 400% overnight to fund a 600% increase in the salary of in the compensation, excuse me, of the CEO of that company. I wish that was an isolated incident, what happened with the EpiPen. I wish that it was just one instance of what is unquestionably price gouging, but it is not. The problem of prescription drugs and the cost that it's creating for our community is a complex one. And there isn't one bill or one solution to that problem, and this bill isn't the solution to the problem. When I had part of this bill last year, what I like to say is that we didn't need a silver bullet, we needed silver buckshot. We needed a lot of solutions. And this is one of them. This is one piece, really two pieces of the puzzle. This bill would give the Attorney General expanded authority to investigate and take action against price gouging of certain prescription drugs. Unfortunately, due to some federal case law, we're limited to generic drugs for this proportion of the bill, and that was the case last year when we considered, or 2 years ago when we considered the bill as well. I think a lot of people think of generics as the cheaper alternative, but it is, and that's often the case, but it's also the case that there's examples of price gouging in the generic marketplace. And I recall in previous years getting a list of some great examples during the testimony, so perhaps you'll hear that in a minute when we have people coming up and testifying. The other component of the bill sets up a Prescription Drug Affordability Board. This is a consumer protection agency. Just as we have a Public Utilities Commission, which provides consumers protection from their energy utilities and the monopolistic power that energy utilities have over consumers, a Prescription Drug Affordability Board can be a consumer protecting entity that treats the public, that recognizes the fact that pharmaceutical companies have monopolistic power over their consumers in many instances. If you need a drug to live, you don't have the power to bargain with the pharmaceutical company. Just like if you need electricity, you can't go across the street and go to a different merchant. And we should recognize that this is a different type of marketplace that consumers should have special protection within. So Madam Chair, that's maybe a 10,000-foot overview of the bill. I'm sure there's going to be a robust discussion. I also know there's a number of testifiers, so in the interest of time, I'll maybe let the testifiers go now.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First on the list of testifiers, we have Jason Plagencool, Assistant Attorney General. You can introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Jason Plagencool. I am an Assistant Attorney General, and I'm the manager of the Consumer Wage and Antitrust Division of the Attorney General's office. Attorney General Ellison regrets that he cannot be here with you today, but he asked me to testify in his stead in order to voice his strong support of House File 17, which takes important steps to combat the high cost Minnesotans pay for prescription drugs that are consistent with recommendations made by the Attorney General's award-winning Drug Price Task Force report. In 2019, the Attorney General convened a task force to study the problem of the high cost of prescription drugs and to make recommendations to tackle this problem. The task force makeup was bipartisan and included experts on prescription drug pricing, patients and their family members, medical practitioners, as well as representatives from the Board of Pharmacy and the legislature. The task force met publicly and took testimony throughout 2019 and ultimately published a 93-page report that not only diagnosed the causes and contributors to high drug prices, but also made 14 recommendations to lower the cost of prescription drugs for Minnesotans. Both the executive summary and the full report are available on the landing page of the Attorney General's website, and I would encourage you to take a look at it. In 2020, the National Conference of State Legislatures conferred a notable document award on the report. 2 of the task force 14 recommendations are embodied in House File 17. The first is prohibiting drug manufacturers from imposing excessive price increases on drugs sold in Minnesota. The second is establishing a drug affordability board that can investigate cost increases of prescription drugs, publish reports on pricing trends, and when appropriate, allow the board to set a ceiling or cap on the amount paid to purchase drugs that create an affordability challenge to patients in Minnesota. If Minnesota enacts House File 17, it would be the 8th state in the country to establish such a board. House File 17 would help rein in the high costs of that are being paid for life-saving medications. And unfortunately, excessive price increases of both generic and branded prescription drugs continue to cause affordability challenges to Minnesotans. To name just a few examples that the enactment of House File 17 could help address. First, fluconazole, which is a generic drug, and this is an antifungal medication that 2 different generic manufacturers raised the list price of from $2 to $28 and $24 respectively, which constitutes a price increase of over 1,000%. Lisinopril would be example number 2. This is another generic drug, and this is a medication that's used to treat chronic heart failure and hypertension. A manufacturer raised the list price of this generic drug from $20 to $129, a 539% increase. Another example is Acthar, which is a branded prescription drug used to treat multiple conditions, including lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. This drug was originally approved in 2010 by the FDA. It was sold by Sanofi at a list price of $40 per vial initially, but after it was purchased by a subsequent manufacturer, the new owner now sells the drug for $39,784 per vial. These are by no means isolated examples. According to one federal Health and Human Services report, in January of 2022, the average price increase of existing prescription drugs was nearly $150 per drug. And in July 2022, it was on average $250 per drug. In 2022, according to the Health and Human Services report, several drugs increased their list prices by more than $20,000 or by more than 500%. Enacting House File 17 would go a long way to help Minnesota combat this problem. And the Attorney General's office has an important role to play under the bill. The Attorney General would have the authority to investigate and bring enforcement actions against prohibited excessive price increases of generic drugs. The Attorney General's office would also provide legal services to the board that's created.
Mr. Flagencool, I'll just ask you to wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the Attorney General also can bring enforcement actions to the extent an upper payment limit set by the board is violated. In sum, this bill is going to help Minnesotans afford their lives and live with dignity and respect. And so the Attorney General's office strongly supports enactment of the bill and would urge you to do so as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Mary Jo George. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony. Following, we have Bob Miller.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Mary Jo George, and I'm the Advocacy Director for AARP Minnesota. On behalf of AARP and a coalition of community, labor, small businesses, and farmers, we appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of House File 17, a bill to rein in the high costs of prescription drugs. We also want to thank Representative Stevenson for bringing this important bill forward. The high cost of drugs hurts everyone, not only those who rely on prescription drugs for their health, but all of us who are paying higher premiums and out-of-pocket costs, as well as taxpayers who are paying for our public programs. Americans have seen their prescription drug prices skyrocket, and they are sick and tired of paying the highest drug prices in the world for critically needed medication. About 30 years ago, the public was outraged over a drug that cost less than $10,000 per year, and we now have drugs approaching over $1 million per year. A recent report by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services noted that list prices on more than 1,200 medication rose faster than inflation, rising on an average of 31.6%. So it's hardly surprising that we hear stories from Minnesotans facing serious health and financial consequences due to high prescription drug prices. And the reality is that we're often talking about costs that patients will face every year for the rest of their lives. As you've heard, under House File 17, the Affordability Board can review drug prices that pose a affordability challenge and set upper payment limits that apply throughout the healthcare system to not only protect consumers, but other stakeholders in the system as well. Also, price gouging will protect consumers from sudden and unreasonable spikes in generic prescription drug prices. Efforts like these will ensure that consumers can access and afford medications they need and could save billions of dollars for patients, taxpayers, and our healthcare system. So on behalf of our coalition and countless others, we urge you to pass this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Miller, you can introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony. Following, I have Linda Larson on the list.
Let me get my glasses on here so I can read what I
Not a problem.
want to talk to you about. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bob Miller. I live in Prior Lake with my wife, Mary, and I'm here because I'm among the nearly 40% of the people living with multiple sclerosis who have altered the use of their medications due to cost. When I was diagnosed almost 20 years ago, it started out with just a tingling in my cheek. And then I got dizzy, and my speech was slur, and then I started having difficulty with one of my legs. At one point, it got so bad that I was slurring my speech and getting dizzy about every 15 minutes. Within a few months, I was prescribed beta-seron, a disease-modifying therapy that has been shown to modify the course of MS and prevent the accumulation of disability. Symptoms and prescription therapies vary widely for unpredictable MS, and beta-seron happened to work for me for 12 years. When introduced in 1993, beta-seron cost $11,500 a year. By 2020, its cost had risen to over $111,000 per year. Median cost for MS DMTs was $94,000 in 2022. And when generics are included into that figure, it's still $80,000. As I transitioned insurance carriers 7 years ago, I checked to see what my out-of-pocket costs would be. I was told I'd pay over $10,000 a year out of pocket, and I'm on a fixed income, and that amount jeopardizes my retirement security. When I stopped taking beta-seron, my doctors told me I was rolling the dice with my health. Luckily, I haven't had a relapse in those 7 years, but I don't know what the future holds. MS is quite unpredictable. I strongly feel that no one should have to make that kind of decision. Medications cannot improve lives of people if they can't afford to access to them. The National MS Society applauds HF 17's intent to bring more transparency, discussion, and attention to the high cost of prescription drugs for people with chronic conditions. We appreciate that the Prescription Drug Affordability Act sections of the bill utilize a multi-stakeholder approach in acknowledging the roles of health plans, employers, clinical researchers, drug manufacturers, patients, and others. People with chronic illnesses like MS need to know that they'll be able to get the life-changing medication they need when they need it. I urge your support for the Prescription Drug Affordability Act, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Linda Larson, you're up next.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, you were calling the next testifier. I'm just wondering how many testifiers we have because I did let the chair and the bill author know that we do have a number of questions we'd like to be able to pursue today.
Certainly. We have about 14 more minutes slotted for testimony. We have got 5 testifiers, and then we'll be able to move to discussion after
Thank you,
that.
Madam Chair.
Certainly. You can introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Madam Chair and members of this committee, my name is Linda Larson, for the record. I'm a third-generation, lifelong Minnesotan, and a farmer, grew up on a farm, and I'm a member of the Minnesota Farmers Union. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'll be brief. I'm here to speak in support of House File 17, establishing a Prescription Drug Affordability Board, and finally putting a check on the price gouging of prescription drugs. During the height of the pandemic, I contracted bacterial bronchial pneumonia. It wasn't COVID. Because of the shutdowns, I was unable to make a doctor's appointment, so 2 trips to the emergency room and 6 video appointments over a 7-week period of time, each with a different person. Someone finally found a way to help. They said I should be hospitalized, but there were no available beds. Inhaler prescriptions opened my airways enough for me to be able to breathe without gasping for air. It took 2 more months, though, before I could even go up or down a stairway without stopping. The rest of the story is that my throat and lungs are permanently damaged due to the longevity of my illness, which you can probably hear in my voice, and I now have asthma. I need these 2 inhalers for the rest of my life due to my damaged pulmonary system, and I'm now at high risk for developing COPD and/or emphysema. 1 inhaler is a steroid. My copay at Costco Pharmacy for 3 of them was $411 last time I picked them up. That was my copay after insurance. The price goes up every time. If I were to purchase only 1 at a time, the copay is $289. Figure that out. $289 for 1, $411 for 3. It makes no sense, and the pharmacy couldn't explain it either. This exact same inhaler in Canada sells outright for $92 for 3 of them. The drug companies are getting away with such extreme pricing with little or no accountability or consequence, and through the continual consolidations that further reduce the competition, I'm really concerned about the future without intervention. The Prescription Drug Affordability Board is a common sense first step toward tackling the exorbitant price of prescription drugs. I urge you to pass House File 17. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us. Next, I have Judy Cook. Yep. We are going to try to stay to 2 minutes for our remaining testifiers so everybody gets a chance to share their thoughts. You can introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Judy Cook on behalf of the Association for Accessible Medicines, representing the generic and biosimilar manufacturers. There's a letter from AAM in your packet that outlines their opposition to House File 17, as well as the benefits of generics and biosimilars, the segment of the prescription drug marketplace that is providing significant savings for consumers. The price gouging provisions in this bill do not address the cost drivers in the prescription drug marketplace, and a federal court has already found a similar law unconstitutional. But the fundamental question is, why are you targeting generic drugs? Generics are 91% of prescriptions filled, but only 18% of drug spending. Generics make up only 2% of all healthcare spending. And I'll talk about a couple commerce-related provisions in the bill. This bill allows the state to sue a generic manufacturer if they increase the price of a drug $30. Yet it does not require a Minnesota consumer to have received that manufacturer's drug or paid that price. Just because one manufacturer increases the price, other manufacturers of the same generic drug likely will not, because it is a competitive marketplace. And that is true for some of the examples noted. Also, this section of the bill will do nothing about the cost of a brand drug that increases by thousands of dollars. Generic drugs are sold to wholesalers at a national level and usually outside of Minnesota. The wholesaler determines which generic manufacturer's products are sold to Minnesota pharmacies. In most instances, the manufacturer's portion of the transaction does not occur in the state. It does not make sense that every generic manufacturer must maintain a registered agent and office in the state when the subsequent sale is outside of their control. We are not familiar with any other product sold in Minnesota that has this requirement. Regarding the prohibition of withdrawal of generic drugs from the state and reporting requirements, again, it's the wholesaler who has control of where generic drugs are sold or not sold. So the manufacturer would not know if their product is being sold in Minnesota, unless, of course, they discontinue making the drug altogether, and this language does not contemplate that.
Thank you, Mrs. Cook. I'll just ask you to wrap up.
Oh, I am. Regarding the Drug Price Affordability Board, AAM's concerns are outlined in the bill. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Bentley Graves, the Chamber of Commerce. You can introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony. Following, we have Peter Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. My name is Bentley Graves. I'm with the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. The Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, we represent 6,300 employers across the state and more than 500,000 employees. We work on healthcare issues because healthcare costs are a significant concern for our employer members and for their employees. And so not surprisingly, you would find significant agreement amongst our members about the goals of House File 17 to lower the cost of drugs and improve access to these life-saving drugs and therapies. Having said that, I'm here today to express some concerns with the approach of the bill. On behalf of our members who are private sector actors in the private market, we have significant concerns about the idea of a government commission setting the prices for privately produced goods in the private marketplace. While again there's significant overlap with the goals of the bill. There are concerns that extend beyond that, and you've heard from Ms. Cook, and I'm sure you hear from others from the industry as well about some of the unintended consequences that may flow to patients in Minnesota and the access to the drugs that they may or may not have. But I appreciate the opportunity to share these concerns. I appreciate the conversations we've had with the chair, and want to continue to work with him and members of the committee to find solutions that we can support. But unfortunately, House File 17 is an approach that we cannot today. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your time. Peter Nelson, you're up next. You can state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony. Finally, we have Christina Moorhead after.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Peter Nelson, and I'm a senior fellow with Center of the American Experiment. I believe the last time I was talking in this building was back in 2017. I was talking about reinsurance. In the meantime, I went to D.C. and worked for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, where I led a lot of the agency efforts on regulations of insurance and insurance exchanges. In that role, I worked a lot. I led the efforts on price transparency for health plans. And obviously, prescription drug price transparency was part of that approach. And I guess my message here today is I believe that price controls in this bill are the wrong approach to addressing our drug pricing issues. Price transparency is where we should be focused. Drug price controls have some obvious and predictable negative consequences, like any government control over a price. They often lead to shortages, to lower quality, and to fewer new products. And the concern, of course, on this bill is that it's going to lead to fewer new drugs. Of course, price controls reduce the incentives for research in this industry, which leads to fewer new drugs. And I also want to mention that I believe that the focus here on drug pricing is misplaced, because when you look at the CMS data coming out on the national health expenditure front, it shows that drug pricing is actually one of the lowest growth areas of our healthcare spending. In fact, over the past 5 years, healthcare prices have dropped overall when you look at their price index. So when you look at that period of time, drug prices actually accounted for a $9 billion reduction in national health expenditure spending. By comparison, hospital prices accounted for over $140 billion in spending. So I do think the focus on drugs is misplaced. I think we should be focused on price transparency overall. That includes price transparency for drugs. That includes price transparency for hospitals. And if we bring hospital pricing and drug pricing out of the hidden realms that are so confusing and hard to understand, I think you'll bring out that competitive pressure that will eventually truly bring down pricing. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Christina Moorhead, you can introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony. I do have one member of the public who has asked to speak after this as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Christina Moorhead. I'm a Deputy Vice President of State Policy for the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, or PhRMA. We represent the country's leading innovative biopharmaceutical research companies that have invested nearly $1 trillion since 2000 in the search for new treatments and cures, including an estimated $102 billion in 2021 alone. Pharma agrees that the policy changes are needed to lower patient out-of-pocket costs for medicines, but we believe that House File 17 is not the solution. Several other states have enacted prescription drug affordability boards with language similar to this bill since 2019, and none have lowered patient out-of-pocket costs. Maryland has spent nearly $2.5 million since 2019 on their prescription drug affordability board, and they've yet to set an upper payment limit for a single medicine. Maine's Prescription Drug Affordability Board has been active since their legislation passed in 2019, and they have not yet implemented a policy that has reduced patient out-of-pocket costs. New Hampshire's board has met a total of 16 times since 2020. They have not implemented a policy that has reduced patient out-of-pocket spending, and they are currently looking at 2 bills this session that would repeal their board. Additionally, Colorado is currently experiencing difficulties and delays in their attempts to establish an upper payment limit for a single prescription drug in their state. These states have spent significant time and resources investing in this policy, and it has failed to live up to the promises of regulating prescription drug prices and lowering patient out-of-pocket costs. In fact, if this legislation were to pass and if the state were to establish an upper payment limit for a prescription drug, there's no guarantee that a patient would pay the upper payment limit amount for a prescription drug as drafted in the bill. The bill appears to try to circumvent federal law and case law issues by regulating provider billing to bill no more than the upper payment limit. However, the amount a patient pays when they have health coverage is whatever the health plan designates as their cost. House File 17 does not attempt to regulate health plan coverage and reimbursement, which means there's no guarantee that patient out-of-pocket costs will change as a result of this legislation. However, we are in agreement that patients need help with their out-of-pocket costs for prescription drugs.
You could just wrap up, Ms. Moorhead. Thank you.
You'll see we gave to the committee a handout that has other policy options that other states have passed and are considering, including passing to rebates to patients at point of sale, and also looking at patient assistance and ensuring that applies to the deductible. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. We have Mark Hughes, a member of the public who has asked to speak. You can come up to the testifier table and introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony. Chair Stevenson,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry.
What
Didn't see
happened? Bring your own chair. Very good, thank you.
No, I'm sorry. I would have.
Members of the committee, Chair, thank you for this time. My name is Mark Hughes, and I'm just an old fossil that's been around here a long time. I don't want to hold this up or pass it along. This is a Walgreens club card that you can belong to if, for example, your insurance is locked at a date you can't get your prescription filled, then you can pay a discounted price on your prescription. My number one point today is that shouldn't be. We're a state of one for all and all for one. If you needed the prescription, they wouldn't give it to you if you didn't need it, so you got to buy it, so forth and so on. Number two is I have a disease called Barrett's esophagus. I'm not the only one in the state of Minnesota that has that. But when it first started, I was doing an upper GI, and then it was decided that my insurance changed and I needed to go on a generic drug. My body rejected the generic drug, and I needed the regular prescription as opposed to the generic to try to combat that. I couldn't get it because my insurance didn't cover it. So therefore, that was kind of a blockade. So I've had, and I'm very thankful, and I didn't give up my medical technology, and I'm having another procedure on 24th of February. But they haven't told me that's all we can do. I'm glad we can have it. However, I talked to my surgeon before the specialist I was sent to. I went back and got some more consultation. And she said that she's believed in her medical profession that if I would have been able to take the generic drug, I would have had half the procedures that I would have had. And so now I'm going under treatment number 30, and all I'm saying is if I would have been given on my insurance the okay to take the regular prescription instead of a generic, I think I would have saved some money and some time. And I guess I just feel I'm going to support the bill, and I'm just one of 5 million people in the state of Minnesota. But thanks for listening, and I'm concerned about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you for your time and sharing your experience with us, and best of luck on your upcoming treatment. All right. We do have a few amendments today, members. Start with the A2. Representative Niska, would you like to move and describe the A2?
Thank you, Chair Katiza Watun and Representative Stevenson. The A2 is one of a number of concerns attempting to address a number of concerns I have with the remedy provision. And as I discussed with Representative Stevenson, it may be possible that I am willing to withdraw this amendment. And I'm interested in Mr. Plegan-Cool from the Attorney General's office, if he can help me just to clarify the way that the bill works, and in particular the pre-suit discovery that's provided on page 3, 28 and 29. My concern initially reading the bill is that this might allow pre-suit discovery with no legal threshold, but if I'm following kind of the ping-ponging between the different provisions, and maybe Mr. Plegan-Cool, if you could confirm this for the record, it's at least the Attorney General would need some sort of reasonable cause to believe that a violation has occurred before seeking pre-suit discovery, going to petition to the court for pre-suit discovery under the bill as it's written. Is that the case? I just want to clarify that for the record.
Mr. Plagencool.
Madam Chair, Representative, yes, that is how I read the bill as well. The kind of above in subdivision 2B, right above the section you were seeking to amend, incorporates the standards in section 8.31, and that's the provision that requires reasonable grounds in order to engage in a pre-suit investigation, and so we would agree that that's incorporated in the bill already.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I have a number of other concerns that aren't related to this amendment, but I'll withdraw the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Niska. We will move on to the A3 amendment. Members, Representative Perryman, would you like to move the A3?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Representative Stevenson. I move that Amendment A3 is proposed. This amendment reduces the length of the notice a manufacturer must give the state withdrawing a product from 180 days to 90 days.
Thank you, Representative Perryman. Chair Stevenson.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Perryman, I would be, I was going to listen to the argument that you had for this amendment before making up my mind. So I don't know if you have more to offer about why you're offering this amendment, or could say more about it, because I don't know, with any number, there's nothing magic about 180 or 90 or whatever, but, I'd be interested to hear why 90 is preferable to 180 in this instance.
Representative Perryman.
Chair, thank you. Representative Stevenson. As a cancer survivor, I'm on many meds as I get to revivalship, I call it. And it's just because most of meds today are 90 days. They're a 3-month supply, and then you have to renew it. In fact, if you look at my calendar, every 90 days, I am going back to get the renewal. So I'm just trying to match up the renewal of meds in real life with what you're asking for of the length of time for pulling out the meds.
Chair Stevenson.
Well, Madam Chair, Representative Perryman, tell you what, that makes sense. I tend to think that more notice might be better for people to know that what's going on and for the public, so I'm a little reticent. But this bill has a few more committee steps to go on, and I think we'll hear from people as it goes along. So what I'd be willing to do today is take the amendment, and then we'll see how the discussion continues, and maybe you and I can continue to talk about this particular issue, but I'd ask for a yes vote today.
Thank you, Representative.
Do you have a follow-up? I'm sorry.
No, I'd like to work on it just to make it ease and sensible of 6 months to 3 months, if we can do that.
Great.
Representative.
Thank you. I just wasn't sure who said representative, so I was looking down here. So members, any further discussion to the A3 amendment? Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I think the Chair Stevenson's being really, really generous. I guess I would ask Representative Perryman to continue working on it without making the change today. I'm going to oppose the change, and, I think we can continue discussion on the bill, but having more notice is more in the interest of Minnesota consumers. And it's, good that, it's at least enough time for somebody who's on a drug to run through their refill or get a refill or whatever, but there might be issues going on like, needing to figure out what the substitute drugs are, or, formularies being adjusted. So I don't really see why we would want to reduce this from 180 to 90. I think there needs to be a better case made for that before I would vote for it.
Members, any further discussion? Then all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
The motion does prevail, and the amendment is adopted. We have A4 amendment. Representative Dotseth, would you like to move the A4?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Representative Stevenson. I'd like to propose Amendment A4, which requires this bill. Currently, the bill, first of all, I'd like to just say that the number of heartfelt testimonies today. I think we can all appreciate everyone that came here today. This amendment just basically requires that manufacturers have a registered agent or office in the state of Minnesota. The concern I have is what kind of price increase will this have on the prescription as we move forward, and the cost of doing business here in Minnesota. Also, this cost shouldn't be included in the calculation of excessive price increases. This amendment also requires the cost to be considered when the AG makes that decision. I kindly ask for this amendment to be approved.
Chair Stevenson.
Well, thank you, Representative and members. I'm going to oppose the A4 amendment. I don't think that this is necessary, and I also kind of reject the premise of this bill being a contributor to the cost of prescription drug increases, so I'd ask for a no vote.
Representative Stevens, I just say that I would...
Representative Dotseth.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would still encourage a yes vote on this amendment, just to provide some comfort language. If it's already in part of the bill, I guess it would be no harm in including this in clarification as we move forward.
Chair Stevenson, anything further?
No, I think there is, Madam Chair, I disagree with both the premise of the amendment and its effect. I disagree with the premise that the cost of compliance is a significant driver with this bill is a significant driver of the cost of prescription drugs, and I disagree with what this amendment would do, so I'd ask for a no vote.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Dodseth. I was going to ask this after, but it's probably more appropriate now. And I'm just wondering, Representative Stevenson, you seem quite convinced that this will not add cost, but I'm wondering, I'm not sure that there is a good definition of having an agent within the state. Are there other manufacturers in the state that already have to have a registered agent?
Chair Stevenson.
Madam Chair, Representative New, you're taking me all the way back to my civil procedure classes, and I don't know if Representative Niska is also having flashbacks at this moment to that. At this point, I think that there is are examples, and we could certainly talk offline, or we can look, or we could maybe even ask House Research about other industries where registered agents are common or required.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually think that's really important and pertinent to this amendment particularly. We should have an idea of what this means, what it's going to cost the manufacturers, because certainly the language in the bill is not just that they are required to have an agent within the state. That agent is required to office within the state. So we're talking about manufacturers who may not have a manufacturing facility in the state of Minnesota, but they are required to have this registered agent who offices within the state, and that is certainly going to add significant costs to the manufacturer. And so to think that we're going to increase the costs on the drug manufacturers and then hold them accountable for that cost seems a little out of alignment.
Chair Stevenson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, Representative New Brindley. There's a whole industry around maintaining registered agents in order to establish grounds for receiving process and service and other things like that. The cost of doing this is not significant on the scale of prescription drugs in the state of Minnesota. This is a de minimis cost. I think it's not really going to be, when we're talking about the scale of price increases we are seeing in the prescription drug marketplace, the idea that the cost of establishing a registered agent in the state is a significant driver of that cost is just not accurate. And you could look into this, but it's very common to have registered agents across the state, and it's a de minimis cost.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And while I appreciate that, Representative Stevenson, you still haven't told us really what it's for in the state, and if we have other manufacturers who are required to do this. de minimis is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. We also have not been told what it will cost and what would be the approximate cost of having a registered agent in the state. So I think there are a lot of outstanding questions on this, and I think it's reasonable to say that, we can't directly increase the cost to a manufacturer and then hold them accountable for that cost. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical.
Representative Doubt.
Thank you. Why are you requiring a registered agent, and what's the purpose of that? Why are you doing it?
Chair Stevenson.
Madam Chair, Representative Doubt, you need, as I alluded to with the civil procedure comment, you need to have a registered agent for an entity that doesn't have an office in Minnesota to be regulated, to have the service of process and other things like that.
Representative Doubt?
No.
Okay. Great. Members, any further questions or discussion to the A4 amendment? All right. Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed?
No.
The motion does not prevail, and the amendment is not adopted. We'll move on to discussion to the bill as a whole, as amended. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Stevenson. We heard one of the testifiers suggest that this is sort of a first step, but it's not a first step. A couple years ago, we passed the drug transparency bill that required a report, and the legislature should have seen a report in May of 2022. We also should have seen a report, is that just last week and a half ago, on January 15th. I know you are the chair of the Commerce Committee. I am the minority lead on the Human Services Finance Committee. Both of us should have received that report, and I'm wondering, have you received that report yet? I have not. I'm wondering if you have.
Chair Stevenson.
Madam Chair, Representative New Brindley, I receive a lot of emails every day, so I don't want to say authoritatively I have not, but I can't recall laying my eyes upon it. While I have the microphone, I just want to say that someone in our amazing audience has answered your question about the cost of having a registered agent in Minnesota by doing some Google research. And you can have a registered agent in Minnesota for $49. So I again will repeat that I do not believe that is a significant driver of the cost of prescription drugs in Minnesota.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure that our pharmaceutical manufacturers are going to want to find their registered agent off of LegalZoom, but you never know. It's possible that they could get one for $49, but somehow I am a skeptic. You'll forgive me for being a skeptic on that. I've got a real question on the generic and off-patent drugs. As one of our testifiers testified that generics account for 91% of the drugs in the state and 18% of the cost. I mean, these are clearly not the significant drivers. And I'm wondering why you're not including brand drugs. Why are you not including patented drugs in this bill on price gouging? I mean, the way I read this, theoretically, a generic drug could increase in price by $30, and they're going to be charged with price gouging, depending on the other factors involved, whereas a brand drug could increase $1,000, and there's no consequence. So I'm wondering why that portion of this bill is exclusive to generic drugs.
Chair Stevenson.
Madam Chair, Representative New Brindley, as I mentioned in my opening statement, we had to restrict it to generic drugs due to some federal court decisions. The initial version of this bill, as it existed several sessions ago, did include brand names, but we had to pull them out as a result of some litigation in another state.
Representative Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm wondering, Representative Stevenson, I have heard this before, but I've never had laid eyes on it. Do you have a copy of those court decisions that we can review?
Chair Stevenson.
Madam Chair, Representative New Brindley, I'm sure that we can get you a copy of that. I don't have them in my physical possession right here in the room, but I'm sure we can get you a copy
Or direct us.
of the court decisions.
Send us in the right direction.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will skip the registered agent questions. We've gone there. I would address quickly we talked about the board, that you changed the makeup of this PDAP in your A1 amendment. And I would just point out, I'm really concerned about the changes that you just made, actually. I think a more logical change would have just been to clarify that that board member may not be a member of the legislature. I think that could have been appropriate. But the way you have changed this is now, it's made up of 7 members who are voting members appointed by the governor, 1 non-voting member by the majority leader of the Senate, 1 non-voting member by the Speaker of the House. And these all need to be appointed by January 1st of 2024. And so I would just point out that this makes this board a 100% partisan board. And I think that's problematic. I mean, if you went back to the previous version, we're talking about, 2 minority members that might offer a different perspective, but I think it is really problematic to have a board makeup that is 100% partisan. I just don't think that that's good for Minnesota. I think that should be reconsidered moving forward, and I apologize for not taking a closer look at that amendment prior to being here so I could offer an amendment to the amendment.
Chair Stevenson?
Madam Chair, Representative Brindley, I think you have a fair point that we could probably change in a future committee to similar to the fact that the PUC in its composition has members that are required to be, not a member of one party or to be a member of another party. I think we could probably work on that. I understand the solution you proposed would not have worked. I don't think, as I understand it from what I've read and understood. I know that might be inconsistent with what I said earlier, but I think we can't have legislators appointing voting members to these administrative boards. So I think just changing it to not legislators would not have solved that problem. But the underlying concern that you have about it being all one party, I think we could address in a future committee.
Madam Chair.
Representative New Brindley, I will note for members, we can go 10 minutes over, but we will vote no later than 2:40. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Will you just clarify what you just said, that there's a problem having legislators appoint?
Yeah.
Or legislators appointed?
Chair Stevenson.
Yeah.
Because that would be
Madam Chair,
with how you amended it still.
no, the bill has the governor making the appointments of voting
For the
members.
voting members.
Yeah. My understanding is that the technical advice that we received is that we can't have legislators appointing voting members of the board.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on, this upper payment limit, there are clearly the goal, and I think we all appreciate the goal, right, is to control drug prices, but that's presumably we're trying to control drug prices for the end user, right, for patients who need these drugs. I am concerned with the language here that I'm not sure that we're actually accomplishing that. As I read the language, I'm very concerned. We're bypassing the insurer relationship. One of our testifiers mentioned that he needed this new drug, but that new one wasn't covered by the insurer. Well, that wouldn't solve his problem. That wouldn't solve this end user problem. So there's some questions there that I think are significant. I have one final question. I'm wondering, I didn't realize that we would have a testifier who had worked with Medicare at the federal level, but I'm wondering if Mr. Nelson could come back and answer a question for me. Is he still here?
Mr. Nelson,
or did he go?
Oh, there you go. Yes.
Excellent.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson, I actually had this question in my notes before knowing you were going to be here, so I appreciate that coincidence. But I have a question on page 14 on the ERISA plans and the Medicare drug plans. So it says in here that on lines 1412 to 1415, the state must bill all payers no more than the upper payment limit. That's what they are allowed to bill. My question is, on a personal level, I've worked a great deal with Medicare. And my question is, Medicare seems to typically have a set payment schedule. And so could we run into a situation here where the state decides that the upper limit is $100, but the Medicare payment is $150. How would Medicare handle that situation? I mean, it seems like Medicare pays what they pay. They're going to pay the $150. And do we run into a situation where we are creating perhaps a conflict with kickbacks? I mean, what happens in that circumstance potentially?
Representative New Brinley, just for myself and maybe for the benefit of the other members of the committee, can you repeat which section you're referring to?
Yes.
Follow along.
I'm section 16, page 14, lines 12 through 15.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Mr. Nelson.
Representative New, I believe that section you're referring to, I don't have it in front of me, I'm sorry, but I believe that section is related to the interest in applying this to ERISA plans and the fact that ERISA plans are generally preempt from state laws, and which is why the next section basically goes on to say that ERISA plans can participate if they want to. But nonetheless, we're charging where you can't charge the ERISA plans more. The provider can't do that. And so I found this curious, and I have not looked into the details of these paragraphs, and it's one of those things on my list of things to do regarding this bill, because it seems like a cute way to avoid ERISA preemption, and I'm not sure if this is really the appropriate way to do that. And I've spent a lot of time actually in my years thinking about ERISA preemption, because there's a lot of things I would like the state to do that ERISA preempts. And I appreciate the effort here, but I'm not sure if this actually works. And in terms of Medicare pricing, Medicare is going to pay the price that Medicare sets. And so in that instance, it's not, even though I would imagine that's true. I will admit, I worked in the insurance portion. I worked at Sasayo. Medicare was not an entity that I worked with, so I'm not very familiar with the Medicare reimbursement. I've had to actually reject a lot of calls from consultants who want my advice because I did not have experience in Medicare reimbursement at CMS, but as I understand it, they're going to pay the set fee, and so this wouldn't impact it.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Representative New Brinley, any follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I will just add, we are running into this problem across the board, when we hear bills in this committee. We have big bills. We try to fix a few things, but we know that we're always time limited. And but we're trying to do big things in ways that are not necessarily well thought through and have pretty significant issues that are going to cause problems down the road, especially when we know that this has already been done in 4 other states who can't manage to get this implemented. And while I know that you are brilliant, Mr. Chair, I have a hard time believing that somehow we are magically figuring it out right here, when just in this committee we can point to a number of problems that we're going to run into with this. I just think that a bill like this needs more time. I think it would be prudent. I think we would be wise to at least take a look at the transparency data that should theoretically be coming in. Frankly, it's very tardy. I'm not sure why we haven't seen that yet. We should have seen that months ago. But we are writing pretty sweeping, broad legislation with clearly a lot of things that have not been thought out, when we should have data to help inform this. And right now, we haven't even laid our eyes on that data yet. And we should probably do that before moving forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Chair Katiza Watun and Representative Stevenson. You referenced some case law that limited Minnesota's ability to regulate patented drugs. I think the case you might be referring to is BIO versus the District of Columbia from the Federal Circuit in 2007. But I'm concerned about another case from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals that struck down an almost identical law from Maryland, and where the state of Maryland had to pay the pharmaceutical industry's attorney's fees as a result of that. And I'm curious whether there is any factual distinction between the price gouging provisions in this bill and the Maryland bill that were struck down, or are we just gambling on the Eighth Circuit creating a circuit split with the Fourth Circuit in order to not just transfer money from the state treasury to the pharmaceutical industry?
Right, Mr. Chair, I will go to you. I just want to note that we have Lito Driscoll on to wrap things up, and we will be voting at 2:40.
Yeah,
Mr.
no,
Chair.
I'll be very brief and say, no, we are not gambling. We have learned from the experience in other states and modified this bill accordingly. I don't know that we have time to go into specifics of that now. I'm happy to talk with you on that offline.
Lito Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I concur, Representative New Brindley. This is very big stuff that will affect Minnesotans, and I wish we had more time to do committee work in committees. Representative Stevenson, if an insurance company has a formulary plan with it, and they negotiate with pharmacies and others that are going to be providing those, and there are different prices that are set, but the whole package, everybody agrees on. And then at some point in the future, we go back and renegotiate that. In your bill, if the cost of a drug went from here to here on a full-scale renegotiation on all pharmaceuticals that are in there, to get a blend of what we're looking for, some may be higher, some may be lower, will they be subject to your bill here if they go ahead and agree to, say, move a blood pressure medication from $3 a month to, say, $5 a month, because it's what's been agreed upon in the formulary part with the drugstores and the providers of that medication? Will they immediately become subject to this as a result of a negotiation on a full, broad range of pharmaceuticals?
Chair Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Leo Driscoll, what I would point out is that the bill doesn't make anything per se a problem. What it says is that when you reach certain thresholds, either the board or the Attorney General can initiate additional investigations, can do additional actions, can consider things among multiple factors. So the answer to your question is it depends.
Madam Chair.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, that's kind of interesting because it sounds like there's going to be additional costs for people to go out and see what were the causes on these and where we were at. And I noticed that we don't have a fiscal note and attached with this. Do you know the status of the fiscal note, Representative Stevenson?
Chair Stevenson.
Madam Chair, Representative Driscoll, we've asked for one. It's not back yet. Of course, this committee, if it's going to bear the cost of it, we'll see the bill again.
Madam Chair?
Representative O'Driscoll.
So if insurance companies and/or others who are the payers on this have more regulation, could that lead to what happened to health insurance companies in the state of Minnesota, where they just choose not to do business in the state of Minnesota, thus limiting the ability for Minnesotans to be able to get the drugs and prescriptions that they currently have and enjoy?
Chair Stevenson.
Madam Chair, Representative Driscoll, the short answer is no. We hear conflicting arguments from prescription drug companies about this all the time. They want to have both sides of the argument. They want to say that prescription drugs are a national argument and we are a national drug that we can't go state by state because we have to offer it in all of the states. Oh, but if you do anything, then we won't play here. But we have to play here, but maybe we won't, but we have to. And they go back and forth, whatever is convenient. I don't believe that it's going to cause withdrawal in any significant form, no.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm specifically talking to generics, where any generic manufacturer can pick up a or offer a patent drug. That you may limit the options, and if you have 5 providers, that's great. If you have 1 provider, that's not so great for folks here in the state of Minnesota. More of a statement than anything. My final comment is, I think we're anticipating that this is going to be a problematic bill, and that's why Section 6 of the bill was included here today as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Chair Stevenson, quick wrap up.
Yeah, what I would say is, I was talking about generics too, Representative O'Driscoll. I disagree very strongly with the idea that this bill is not thought out or not prepared. This bill has been in development at this legislature for literally years. I personally have sat through, as the author of this bill, and I'm not the first person to bring either of these bills to this committee, and I personally have sat through many committee hearings on this bill. What we hear from the pharmaceutical companies and from people who are opposed to this bill all the time is there's got to be one more step, one more thing. We need one extra report. We need to know this a little bit more. We should devote a little bit more time. It's just a method of delay. People can't wait. Their prescription drug prices are too high. They need relief now, and we should act now. It's disingenuous to say that, well, this hasn't worked in any other state. It's because pharmaceutical companies have been delaying and obstructing these bills in every state they've been authored. And then to turn around and say, well, it's not working. Well, why do you suppose it is that it's taking a lot of time for these bills to work? Who would stand to benefit from that, and who has caused that to happen? Minnesotans can't wait. Please vote yes.
Right. With that, Chair Stevenson renews his motion that House File 17 as amended be recommended to be re-referred to the Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Committee. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. No. The motion prevails. House File 17 as amended is recommended to be re-referred to the Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Committee.